Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com, transrelational healing, and littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Today I thought we could talk about something that is actually more common than people might think, and that is long-term relationships with narcissists. It's not uncommon for people to equate the length of a relationship with the health or the level of commitment involved in the relationship, especially in romantic relationships, but this is a false equivalence. How long people interact with each other has nothing to do with how healthy the relationship is or how committed anyone in the relationship is to the relationship or to each other. These things are actually not related at all. People can have extremely toxic entanglements that can last for decades upon decades. Because people make this mistake, because they make this assumption, they might sometimes believe that narcissists do not ever have long term friendships or relationships outside of family. That's false. There are many people who have been married to or otherwise entangled with narcissists for decades outside of their family relationships. They might have had a steady, if unstable, relationship that has continued for years, or an on again, off again situation that picks up every couple years, or a situation where there was a large gap in the relationship and then a reunion later. Just like with anybody else, length of the relationship is not evidence of any commitment or bonding on the narcissist's part, nor is it an indication of any special caring for or positioning of the other person. There are some narcissists who will simply stay in relationships even when these are extremely toxic, and even when the narcissist themselves is being mistreated because the other person has come to hate them so much. They just get whatever they can out of it until the other person exits or otherwise ends the relationship. If the other person never does that, the relationship could go on indefinitely because the narcissist does not leave. Some narcissists actually attempt to create abusive dynamics in the relationship, setting up situations to provoke the other person into legitimately mistreating them, not just to claim victimhood, although that's part of it, but also due to what's called repetition compulsion, which is the unconscious repeating and or recreation of a traumatic event, often from childhood, in an attempt to achieve a different outcome for that event, and the large emotionally masochistic streak that so many narcissists seem to have. Some narcissists honestly seem to thrive in negative, toxic situations where everybody's just horrible to each other. For some narcissists, that's all they will respond to in any way whatsoever. It's a very, very toxic situation, very toxic dynamic. There's also a very powerful addiction element at play in these relationships and trauma bonding. With these types of dynamics involved, it is perhaps not out of line to say that many toxic relationships could easily last longer than healthy ones because they are much harder to exit. People who have been in decades-long entanglements with narcissists often have a different perspective on the relationship and the narcissist than people who have not. Those who have been around for years and years have often had the opportunity to see the years-long cycles that we commonly find of this personality's level of functioning. For example, where they will seem to improve in some ways for a few years and then backslide for a few years over and over and over again. People who have been in long-term entanglements have seen the narcissist in many, many different situations or positions, and they might have a different view regarding what this person really is, as opposed to someone who has not dealt with a narcissist for very long, comparatively speaking. For example, people who have been in long-term relationships with narcissists of any kind will eventually see the almost shocking level of immaturity in these personalities, of arrested development, the extreme level of difficulty they have with just day-to-day life and making decisions, the level to which they are mimicking and imitating other adults. This is something that those who have been in a relationship with a narcissist for, let's say, 1 year or maybe even 4 or 5 might not have been able to see just yet because it's very well hidden. Some will, of course, because many narcissists are just not able to hide it for very long, but many times people don't see it until much more time has passed. This is also because the negative, cruel, and abusive behavior from narcissists takes up most of the focus, and rightly so. When people have been in long-term relationships with narcissists, they've certainly seen their share of abuse and cruelty, but they've usually also seen other things about this person that can create a different perspective on who and what this person really is. For example, there's often some pushback regarding the idea that narcissists are generally terrified, miserable people. This makes sense because many people have only so far seen things that just make that sound ridiculous. They see a person who cares about nothing, who is affected by nothing, or maybe who even delights in upsetting and hurting other people, who appears to go through life without a care in the world. But when we are around them every day for years and years and years, we eventually see that this too is a mask of sorts. Not to say that it isn't real, but it's not the whole of the reality. You can think of it like 18 karat gold plating on jewelry. It is real gold, but it's also just a surface layer covering up what else is there. The gold plating is real, but it's not the reality of the piece of jewelry at all. Eventually, the plating wears off, and when it does, you can now see what was underneath of it all along. There's also a common perception that in the Jekyll and Hyde dynamic, the quote good side is fake and the quote bad side is real. But when people have been around narcissists for decades upon decades, they very often can see that neither of these things are really real at all. Not in the way that people with stable identities perceive and understand the concept of who somebody really is. In that context, it's all fake, but it's often necessary to be around someone for quite a while before the depth, the fundamentality of this masquerade can even be seen, let alone truly understood. And of course, it takes years and years and years. It often takes people that long just to understand that this kind of thing can even be, can even exist, let alone be able to see it for what it is, especially when it's being perpetrated by a person whose survival depends on hiding it, whose entire being is structured around that. It's even worse for people with pathologically narcissistic parents. By virtue of their position, parents are assumed to be more mature, more stable, more knowledgeable. They are assumed to be adults, in other words. It can be a tremendous shock for people to find out that they have likely been more mature and stable than their own parent since they were like 5 or 6 years old. It can take years for people to see this and even longer to understand and accept it. This is a very large thing for the brain to try to grapple with, and it can take a very long time. Many times, too, when there are long-standing entanglements with narcissists, this affords the other person or the people around the narcissist a perspective that those who exited the entanglement sooner often don't see because there just wasn't enough time to see it. And this is that when in long-term relationships with narcissists, people can see that they are maturing and growing, but the narcissist is not. The more time that is spent with them, the more clear and obvious this becomes. Over a 10 or a 20 or an even 30-year span, it becomes extremely clear that the narcissist is not maturing at even half the rate that anybody else is maturing. And the more someone looks at this, the more clear it becomes that they never have. This is often, for example, when people with parents who are narcissists start to realize something is much more wrong with the situation than they might have thought. They knew that their parent was selfish or abusive or manipulative or whatever the case may be, of course, but they themselves are now 30 or 40 or even 50 years old, and their parent is still acting the same way they always did decades ago. Nothing has changed. People start to examine their own abilities and their own maturity that has come with their own age, and they realize that this is a much bigger problem than someone being selfish or abusive, as if that's not bad enough all by itself. The same thing happens in all long-term relationships with narcissists eventually, whether they are family or romantic or any other kind. People realize that they have matured and grown, but the narcissist has not. This person is still essentially a small child. They may go through cycles where they can appear to improve in some ways, but when these periods are viewed through the lens of years, a pattern emerges, and the cycle of this person's functional ability is revealed for what it really is. This is something that can cause people who have not had enough experience with it to have false hopes, or perhaps some anxiety and upset if they're out of the relationship, because they see what looks like the narcissist doing better or behaving better in a new relationship or at a different job or whatever. But the reality is that it's just an upswing. These are very, very common for people who are pathologically narcissistic, and the downswing is inevitable because that's just how the cycle of functioning works here. But again, it is often only visible through the experience of many years because that's the only way to see the pattern. Luckily, there are other patterns that can be seen much more quickly, such as the idealized devalue discard structure that narcissists adhere to when they're interacting with other people. In many ways, these relationships are just repetitions of cycles, different cycles, that never move forward. It can take many repetitions of each cycle to actually see that, and this can keep people engaged in the relationship for many, many years because they think there's been some progress. It actually can look like there has been, but eventually the cycle starts over again, and we are able to see that there's been no forward movement at all. It just went in a circle. People who have been in long term relationships with narcissists are usually survivors of long term chronic abuse and mistreatment. They've often been conditioned to take care of this person as if they're a toddler. They've been shamed and punished for having needs and feelings. They've been attacked for simply being human beings. They've been told that they're evil or stupid or abusive or insensitive and many, many, many other things that don't fit into the reality of who they actually are. They've been gaslit, hoovered, triangulated, manipulated for years. Dealing with the stress of this kind of treatment, dealing with the stress of constantly walking on eggshells, of dealing with the constant emotional drama, whether there is actual drama or not, there's still emotional drama, dealing with the constant gaslighting and being forced into a reality that is not your own, dealing with constantly trying to defend yourself, dealing with a human hand grenade who could go off any second, whether a hot or cold explosion. This takes such a toll on your mental, physical, and spiritual health. People in these long-term situations are often dealing with chronic fatigue, autoimmune diseases and disorders, adrenal fatigue and burnout, severe gastrointestinal problems, chronic migraine, sympathetic nervous system issues, insomnia, blood pressure issues, heart issues, and those are just some of the physical manifestations. Many people are also dealing with PTSD, OCD, agoraphobia, trichotillomania, which is picking at the skin or pulling the hair out, anorexia, bulimia, or other dysfunctional relationships with food, and many other anxiety-based disorders, not to mention nightmares, sleep terrors, addictions of every kind, extreme confusion, mental and emotional paralysis. Then there is the spiritual trauma, the loss of trust and faith in so many things, systems, institutions, family, humanity, your own self. These relationships are so often devastating on every level, and the longer we're exposed to it, the more devastating it can be. People who have been in long-term situations with narcissists are often dealing with so many of these things and much, much more. Even after exiting the situation, many of these things can persist for months or even years, but they can be beaten. You've already done the hardest thing, and that was survive in the first place. There is now almost no situation you cannot handle, and that's the truth. When someone has been in a relationship where they've dealt with a narcissist for years and years, they've generally gone through all the stages that we see in these long-term entanglements, sometimes in their own cycle. Bewilderment, fear, appeasement, resignation, numbness, anger, hatred, acceptance, and many are finally at the place where they just don't care anymore. Not in a numb way or a resigned way, but legitimately they don't care about the ridiculousness and the drama of dealing with this person. They are exhausted and tired of dealing with the bullshit by this point, and they have now left the narcissist so far behind in maturity that to even bother with them at all seems silly, even crazy. It goes nowhere, it makes no difference, it accomplishes nothing, it does nothing but make life harder, and it doesn't matter. It is pointless activity for no reason. In even the most generous realistic terms, where we are looking at this through the most generous, most sort of positive lens possible while still being grounded in reality, we see that the narcissist is a person who is so far out in left field, so just confused and so backwards in their perceptions and thinking that taking anything that they say to heart about anything is at the very least absurd and at the most dangerous, actively dangerous. There's just no point. None of it is real, good or bad, and even if it is real in the moment, it's not stable. Nothing makes any difference. Nothing is ever resolved. Nothing changes. It doesn't matter. This is where the recommendation for no contact comes from. People who have walked through the fire and know that the best way to get through the fire is to keep on walking. People will sometimes hear the information shared in these videos and they will respond with, well, that's easy for you to say. No, it's not. It's not easy to say at all for anybody. And it was very, very hard and painful to learn. But it is what it is. And millions of people having the same experience for centuries have all come to the same conclusion here. Nothing else works. There's nothing you can do about this situation except to accept it, learn from it, and move on. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via text, via messenger, via email, and through Skype worldwide. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one about this or anything else, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I teach workshops, seminars, and clinics throughout the year, so if you are interested in seeing what we're running this month, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I have several books in publication. If you're interested in getting a copy, you can find them on Amazon and you can find them on littleshaman.org. And if you're interested in joining our support group with access to exclusive content, weekly support meetings, and more, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that as well. You have been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by shamanspiritcenter.com, Transrelational Healing, and littleshaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Have a beautiful day.
If you've been struggling through dealing with or recovering from an unhealthy relationship with a narcissist or other toxic personality, the Little Shaman has a catalog of over 500 YouTube videos designed to support your journey from discovery to recovery. You can also find additional resources on the Little Shaman website, including tools, courses, workshops, a support group with weekly meetings, and one-on-one appointments with the Little Shaman that are open to clients worldwide. There's even an AI chatbot built and trained exclusively by the Little Shaman using her work that can answer questions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For more information, visit littleshaman.org. You can listen to The Little Shaman wherever you find your favorite podcasts.